Good afternoon, ladies and gents. Christmas is done, and we've swiftly moved into the new year. And this is going to be a quick. I was going to say quick, actually. I'll be as quick as I can. It's a catch up, really, to finish off the back end of last year, as I'm just well behind on updates across the globe with regards to sort of war and conflicts at the moment. But before I get started, I hope everyone had a good Christmas, and more importantly, I just want to wish you all a happy New Year, as it's going to be challenging for some of us. Um, the topic of conversation here is just going to be information based on events that have happened over the last month. I'm not going to go over it all. I've just pulled out a couple of items that I feel are probably important just to kind of finish off 2024. And we'll see how it goes. Again, I'm going to apologize because I'm just going to be throwing up some slides. That's all really that my content is about at the moment, whilst I'm kind of just updating you with some of this news. And also, we're working on a new format to deliver these videos. So once that's ready, then we're good to go. Right. I'm going to start this video with a question. And this question's for all of you. I'll ask the question now. And then I'm going to get on with the video, and then I'll tell you the answer at the end of the video. Which most of you will find to be a bit of an eye-opener, really. Well, for anybody that's living in the UK, but the principle will apply to anyone residing in any country of any particular size geographically. So the question, there is a Russian Bora class submarine 50 miles off the coast of Wales in the Atlantic, and it fires a Balava RS-256 ballistic missile at the capital city of the UK, that being London. How long would it take for that missile to hit the target or a target in the centre of London from, let's say, the 50 miles off the coast of Wales? And guys, I'll give you the answer to this question at the end, but just have a kind of think about that. Now, I started writing the notes up on this video probably a month ago now, maybe a touch longer than that. So it's kind of been a busy back end of the year, and I just haven't had time to put any sort of content out there. And I'm not going to lie, so much has happened over the last 4 weeks alone, and for me to sort of cover it all here and now, that's just not going to happen. So with that, what I want to do is just pick up on a couple of important points from the last 4 weeks that I believe are critical turning points in the Ukraine war, just for this session at the moment. So the escalation of the war in Ukraine, I think, is now moving into a new stage or phase. Meaning, if using the game of chess as an analogy, there are three stages to the game. The opening moves, and for nearly 3 years now, we've been witnessing the opening moves of the war. German, UK, US, and European tanks being shipped to Ukraine. Then there was the Patriot missile systems. Then 9 months talk about how certain governments were discussing on whether or not F-16 fighter jets should or shouldn't be supplied to Ukraine. But another load of political rubbish, to be honest, as it takes at least 9 to 12 months to train any professional pilots on how to use those kinds of assets. Then we heard all the banter about the ATACMS and the Scalps and also the Storm Shadow missiles. However, the Storm Shadow missiles and ATACMS were being used during the summer of 2024, taking out, I believe, the Russian Black Sea Fleet. But the new topic of conversation, not now, well, it kind of is, but it's off the back of an incident that happened not too long ago. But the topic of conversation is the use of such missiles, that's Western missiles or sort of missile systems on targets inside and on Russian territory. Before we go on about this, I want to point this out. The second phase during a game of chess is the middle game. And that, ladies and gents, is where we're kind of heading now, in my view. The use of NATO missile systems targeting sort of assets in Russia is a move in that direction. And always, Russia will continue to draw those red lines in the sand with more threats. And, if any such lines are crossed, then, up come the threats. I believe, and remember, guys, this is only my opinion, and has been really my opinion since the 24th of February 2022, that World War III has probably already started. But when I say this, I'm reserving judgment when making, any kind of claim like that, because it's a big and bold statement. It's a big claim because it is only my opinion, and it's done so mainly based on all of the events that have happened across the entire globe over the last 3 years. But then what do I know? That's just really, that's just my thought. And, I'll give you my verdict actually off the back of that. Back in um, November, so the 24th of November, approximately 5 weeks ago, we've seen Storm Shadow missiles hitting targets inside Russian territory, not deep inside Russia, but on targets such as supply depots, Russian FOBs or forward operational bases, and supply routes such as bridges. And the targets for those missiles have been kind of mainly concentrated in a specific area, that being the Kursk Oblast, where, of course, the Ukrainian soldiers have crossed the border into Russia and have started taking some of the territory. Well, so they've taken some of their own territory, not their own territory, but taking Russian territory, shall we say. Um, and the reason why Putin needed to sort of source human lives for the meat grinder, that being the troops flooding into Kursk from North Korea. Those North Koreans, many of which have never left their country, and they're traveling, sort of 7,000 kilometers to Russia to fight. And with that, they're handed some kit and off to the front lines they go. So, what better than to welcome them with ATACMS, Storm Shadows, and Scout missiles as a welcome package? With that, North Korea have now committed themselves. That goes without saying, and will now continue to sort of send troops into Russia, I believe. Remember, again, everything I say here is kind of what I believe based on events and the movements of assets and decision making and stuff like that. But I believe that North Korea will continue to send troops into Russia for as long as Putin demands it, in exchange for, some so-called advanced and nuclear weapon technology, whatever that might be. And why was why was the Russian attack on it was the 24th, I think it's the 21st, sorry, I got that wrong earlier. There was the Russian attack on the 21st of November in Dnipro, in Ukraine. And that was significant. And why was that significant to the conflict thus far? Well, it's not because Russia have used ballistic missiles or sort of hypersonics, but the additional concern to those missiles used then is because that they were what they call IRBMs, or intermediate range ballistic missiles. So with these, we're talking of ranges between 1,850 to 3,400 miles, and they're a much larger missile than anything that's been used in the conflict to date. The use of ballistic and hypersonic missiles haven't really just been introduced to the conflict now or on the 24th, as they've already been used before last year on other targets across various targets actually in Russia, but also mainly on the borderlines, to be fair. But this IRBM, or intermediate range ballistic missile, which is better known as the RS-26 Orishnik ballistic missile, I think it's called. And these types of weapons are more known symbolically for nuclear roles. So this was simply a warning shot from Russia. Some will say yet another bluff, and others will say it's more serious intentions. So those ballistic missiles fired into Ukraine on the 21st of November were in response to the use of Western missiles hitting targets in Russia. And quite frankly, it's an introduction to such weapons, and that, ladies and gents, should give you reason to be just a little bit more concerned than you may have already been up to this point in that conflict. Those weapons have been designed for nuclear conflicts primarily, and everything in this conflict, in terms of military equipment, technology, and strategies, they're all being tested in Ukraine. Hence the reason that the country is being used as a proxy. But the only thing that hasn't been tested yet, up to date, is a nuclear warhead. And I'm still under the belief that a nuke in the form of a tactical nuke will be used, tested, or whatever you want to call it, during this conflict in Europe. However, again, this is only my opinion, because what do I know? Thankfully, when Russia sent in those hypersonic IRBMs into Ukraine, there were no significant warheads on any type of those missiles. But the next flurry from Russia will, without a doubt, have a payload of some sort, so I'm guessing. Otherwise, it's pointless. That was a warning shot. The first lot was a warning shot. It's like pointing a gun at somebody's face and, moving the gun away and pulling the trigger, that kind of thing. He's not going to do that again. Otherwise, all he's doing is mugging himself off. But as soon as Putin, put that red line out there in the sand, threatening the use of nukes, if those Western missiles were used again on Russian targets, well, that red line was actually crossed within a matter of hours. The very next day, Ukraine sent in more Storm Shadows and attackers onto Russian targets. So the reason why I say you should be listening and watching this phase of the game unfolding carefully now, because it's clear that the West or NATO, Ukraine, or whoever are either clearly intentionally provoking Putin and the Russian regime, or simply do not believe a word Putin is saying when Russia sort of makes those serious threats that they've been doing for months now, or they totally sort of believe Putin's threats and have no choice now but to prepare for war. Either the West want Russia to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine because then that gives NATO the green light to move in, or they're playing a dangerous game of bluff with them. Either way, though, guys, Russia invading Ukraine, not the other way round. Russia have threatened the West with nuclear attacks on capital cities and critical targets across Europe, not the other way round. And right now, Putin's actions, like similar to those previously seen in other previous dangerous dictators in the past, if you follow any history from around the world, those people are a danger to others, to their own citizens, and to themselves. And they just must be stopped. That's it. We could be at that crossroads where, is he going to stop or isn't he? We don't see any signs of that at the moment. So that's it. I mean, in my view, that's kind of where we are at the moment. So we still don't know. None of us know. It's all kind of, for the likes of you and I, this is all guessing work. And to be fair, that's all we can do. We kind of pick up the information, we analyze it, and we filter out all the shit because there's plenty of that out there online. And then we kind of make a judgment call on what we think based on, how reliable the information source is that you're sort of number crunching against. On a more personal note, though, we have to get a couple of things straight here, guys. Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2014. They invaded Crimea. They continue to move westwards. Not at any great speeds, to be honest with you. They're not making much sort of. They're not making much. They're not taking much territory. It's a slow process. It's kind of grinded to a halt at the moment. So, if we're going to sit in Europe and wait for those those Russian foot soldiers to make it into Europe, we could be waiting for years and years, I believe. But they have threatened to invade other countries in Europe. And that's going to be countries starting with, I believe, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. Possibly Finland. Finland's coming on the radar as well. They then move North Korean troops into Russia to fight against Ukraine. But the most important statements to take on board here, guys, is the continuous threats to the West. That's going to be the US, Europe, and NATO with nuclear weapons. Every time Putin and his fucking half-wits threaten nuclear attacks against NATO, that for me becomes personal, as it's a direct threat against me, my kids and my family, everyone I know and those that I don't know. The same threat is being made to populations across all 32 NATO member states and others. So non-NATO sort of countries are potentially at threat here as well. These threats are not just threats on military targets, they are threats to our population. So please don't sit there thinking for 1 minute that you're going to be all right, Jack, that you're all safe and no harm's going to come to you. And also, Don't sit there believing that the government are going to protect you, because they won't. And whilst we're on the subject of threats, because let's face it, there are many threats being made towards the West on a weekly basis. I want to point out a very important fact to each and every one of you, certainly those that live in the UK. I'd done a set of foundation videos for this sort of new channel. Well, it's not so new now. It's probably a few months. It's been going for a few months, but it's relatively new. And in one of those videos, and I think it's titled "The UK Defence Deterrent and Enemy Threats and Targets Part 1." We talk about the threats to us here in the UK. I talk about 40 possible counterforce and countervalue targets I've identified here in the UK. So, if you want to know whether or not you or somebody you know lives in any of those areas, then I suggest you watch that video. I also run a simulated missile attacks on all of those 40 targets, so that any UK viewer can see if they're in any sort of danger or anywhere near those areas, and also what the impact would be to them. But my point here is, one of those top tier targets on my video, or on that video, is the US Air Force Lakenheath and Mildenhall in Cambridgeshire. These are US air bases here in the UK, with many valuable assets and around, I believe, 6,000 personnel operating out of those bases. So they sit side by side. In fact, there's a third base there, which is more residential for all of your pilots and all of your support staff and everything else. So all three of those are primary tier 1 targets. And they are bases that are only, I think it was only 4 weeks ago, we're experiencing, now let me just be careful when I use this word, but reconnaissance. But there were, I believe, reconnaissance drones or drone sort of activity above those bases. So you would have heard about it on the mainstream, about these drones flying above these bases, which it could have been Russian, Chinese, supposedly, or whatever. It's up to you how you deal with that. I'm not going to go into the drone saga too much right now, but we will cover some of it. It doesn't matter, to be honest with you, what spin the mainstream news want to sort of put on the drone activity here in the US and other countries. Something is happening here, or did then. I think it's probably still happening now. The governments are well aware of it, and in some parts, some areas, and depending on what's going on, the governments could also be orchestrating some of it. Russia are, or have, during the chaos of activity and the misinformation, already run reconnaissance operations on said bases and locations, and that will be to pinpoint potential targets, which makes a whole lot of sense during war times. Or, and this is a big or, as been sort of seen in America on the East Coast, in and around New York and New Jersey over the last couple of weeks, there have been many drones spotted over, over that sort of, it's probably 3 weeks now in the skies there. And with that, many theories, much speculations and sort of suggestions were coming out. Now, this is my take on that drone activity. But again, this is only my opinion. The drones seen over the US Air Force bases here in the UK could have been one or both of these scenarios. Either Russia and or another adversary were carrying out reconnaissance operations, collecting intelligence for future targets here in the UK. Plausible, feasible, definitely. Or the UK government were using these drones to look for something on the ground in and around those bases that shouldn't have been there, quite frankly, and possibly emitting a radioactive signature. But we also can't rule out the drone hobbyists also contributing to this speculation, because they would have jumped on this just for a laugh, really, just for some publicity, and I don't know, whatever. Let's keep them out of the frame for now. And basically, what do I mean by all this? So I just want to talk quickly about smuggling something in the form of a weapon into Britain. Ladies and gents, we, and in Britain, we in sort of Britain can't even, when I say we, were talking about the government, can't even stop immigrants crossing the channel in rubber boats, and that's quite frankly a small stretch of water. But then that depends on whether or not you believe that the UK and French governments are orchestrating these activities. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. And let's not forget, there's 7,723 miles of British coastline. And in the eyes of mainstream news, which I strongly suggest you stop watching and listening to, can't even police and govern, a few miles of the UK coastlines. Let's also not forget the Russian frigates, Admiral Golovko, I think, on the 12th of November, so a few weeks back. That was seen conducting missile drills exercises in the English Channel after travelling through the North Sea. And only recently, on the 27th of September, 2 days or the day after Boxing Day, the Royal Navy was scrambled to track two more Russian frigates in the North Sea, and they did so. They tracked them and shadowed them for 500 miles. Now, oh, let's look at how easy it would or could be to smuggle such a weapon and or weapon materials into the US. So the Mexican border is approximately 2,000 miles long, and the US border control can't even control, a very small section of that. However, from footage that I've kind of analysed last year, it seems that in part, US government too, they seem to be allowing and orchestrating the movement of those immigrants or many of those immigrants across its border. And you can take that how you will. We'll leave that there. But let's not forget that there's 3,700 miles of US East Coast line and also over 7,000 miles of Western coastline to police in the battle against, and it could be anything from drugs to people smuggling and even weapons smuggling. But this is my point, and similar to what I've just sort of said happened here in the UK. Only in June of last year, there was a Russian naval ship, which I think was two frigates and one submarine operating off the east coast of America. Whilst on a number of occasions docking in Cuba, I believe, and when we're talking about Cuba, that's 330 miles away from Miami, and not many miles away from the entire south coast of the United States. And my point being really is that there's been Russian activity along the coastlines of both the US and the UK, and a matter of months afterwards, we're now hearing about drone activity above air bases and other strategic locations here in the UK and now in the US. See, there seems to be a bit of a pattern here, but it's for us, the general public, that is, to try and sort of wade our way through the minefield of sort of bullshit out there online and the social media, or through the pathetic sort of smoke screens the governments are putting up across mainstream news and social media platforms. So let's get this straight. And again, this is just my opinion, but my guess is that there's probably already items such as dirty bombs on US soil, because it's impossible for the US to police over 10,000 miles of shorelines. And the same goes for the UK. We can't police, in the eyes of mainstream, we can't police the 26 miles between France and Britain in combating our immigration issues. But then that's another story. Those governments, in my opinion, are orchestrating the whole lot, the movement of the immigrants into these countries. If you think for 1 minute that the government thinks of you and I and everyone else around you as being anything more than just a fucking number, then you better pull your heads out of your asses and think again. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, either on this video. Well, certainly not this video, but I can do another video and we can cover that. It's not conspiracy. It is conspiracy. It's kind of people will label it as some kind of conspiracy that the UK, the US, and other countries are, purposely shipping in human beings for whatever, economical gain that is, whether to fill job spaces or whatever it is. I find this next theory for the drone activity plausible also. It's being suggested, or has been suggested, that some of these drones are government drones, and they're fitted with what they call radioactive sensor detection technology. So that's the same tech found fitted to sort of nuke sniffer planes. and found located at commercial ports, docks, and shipping yards, as well as airports. But not forgetting UAVs, that being the unmanned aerial vehicles and/or the UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles. It's been suggested that these government drones in the US, if in fact that's what they were or are, but could also include, the ones previously seen here in the UK are in fact looking for a radioactive signature or radioactive signatures that one would expect to see sort of emitted from either a dirty bomb or the materials to manufacture such bomb. Feasible? Damn right, that's feasible. And why? Because a dirty bomb could have been transported from any port in the east on a Russian submarine, let's say, for example, and into US international waters back in June. This is speculation, guys, but this is how easy it is. Then, for the submarine, or from the sub, shall we say, by boat onto a deserted piece of US coastline, and there you have it. Or you could have components of a bomb transported from a vessel off the coast, either coast, east, west, south coast, whatever, by drones. You can still use drones to do this to anywhere inland, or one of many other ways. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's easily possible for such activity to happen, and is definitely plausible to suggest many of these drones being spotted in the skies in the US and even in other countries, including the UK, could be searching for radioactive signatures. And quite frankly, the West of many, many enemies now across the globe, encouraging, well, it's encouraged by the devastation caused by war and conflict, sort of inflicted to many regions. Let's not get into that. Actually, sometimes I sit here and I'll go over, some or many of these statements numerous times in order to acknowledge what it is I'm saying and to take in the severity of, what's being said. So, although, whoever views this, they may agree, disagree, and label it up with whatever you want. Put that in the comments and just let me know, to be honest. We're talking about adversary reconnaissance drones operating in the skies, picking out potential targets to strike with either and or a tactical nuke. That's where I'm going with this. When you sit back and you kind of watch, you listen. So you're picking all this up off of mainstream and social media. Those guys out there are picking this information up from wherever their source is. For me, I just pick out the bits that are important, that are feasible, and then I kind of try and build a picture. Now that picture could be speculation, but I tend to try and use logic, and it goes without saying. And for many of you out there, you won't be under this impression, but NATO are pretty much at war with Russia. So, Richie Sunak in the UK last year said that the UK is on a war footing. NATO over the last 3 years have been preparing the whole of Europe for war against Russia. Now, these things are happening, but you're not seeing it. I'm not seeing it unless I go looking for it. So, there's an enemy at hand there. There's a potential enemy, and not just one, guys. We're talking Russia, North Korea. North Korea is, I don't think they're a big threat at all, but they are a threat because they are now supporting Russian troops to fight against Ukraine. But we can't argue with that, guys, because NATO are helping Ukraine. So that's just the way it is. But what I'm trying to say is that I easily see it, plausible and feasible for, an adversary to be using drones to run reconnaissance ops above our air bases, military targets, other locations or strategic locations. And the only reason you're going to do that, guys, is they're going to be potential targets. That's it. Like I say, I don't work for the government intelligence, and I'm not in the military. So what do I know? I don't know. This is, like I say, speculation. Anyway, I'm going to make another suggestion here. Governments from across the globe, many of which are masters of deceit and deception, will encourage what we call false flag scenarios for strategic and political gains. So if a dirty bomb or material used for such weapon is found, then let's say, for example, in the US, then the Iranians will be blamed because that is a green light to go into Iran. Guys, you have to be looking at the bigger picture in and around all of these situations that we're talking about. So what I'm on about is everyone is got the spotlight on the drones and saying what they could and couldn't be and all the rest of it. You need to step back and whatever your theory is, then try and back it up with plausible reasons why why you believe those drones are being for whatever it is you believe they're being used for. But let's just say, just look at the bigger picture and just look at the situations around it. And that's what I do. And because what I'm doing is I'm looking at the overall objective and the end game. So without getting all conspiracy on the subject, the US or West need a reason to go into Iran. And I've been saying this for well over a year now. They need to go in there. They need to disarm Iran of their nuclear weapons, and they need to stop their nuclear program. A dirty bomb and or material to make such a weapon in the US would be blamed on Iran, even if it came from Russia, because that's the green light that's needed to go in. And of course, they can and are going in anyway. I think everyone's just waiting until Trump, sits in his seat and gets all nice and comfy on the 20th, and then that's it. But listen, I'm not going to put dates on this. I don't even know if it's going to happen. But anyway, let's put that aside. I've said it. But something like a false flag on home soil will encourage the masses in backing the war. It's easier for a government to go into a country waging war with the backing of its people, and it's as simple as that, guys. Anyway, enough of all that because let's face it, it is all speculation. It's guessing and simply making things up in some people's eyes as we go along. And we can't be seen to be doing that, can we? And I'll say this again. You're likely to see a hypersonic or two launch from a Russian submarine operating only 100 miles away in the English Channel and or the North Sea somewhere. Like I said earlier, Russian vessels are constantly being tracked around the coastlines of the UK and other European countries, and also the US. In one of my foundation videos, I think it's called Chasing the Submarines, whereby we talk about that exact threat to the UK, as it's one of the greatest threats to us here in Great Britain. So I won't go over that again in this video, but if you want to be aware of any kind of threat, it's going to be Russian submarines swimming around in our oceans. They're our biggest threat. We're an island. We're surrounded by water, and they're circling around like sharks. And whilst we're on this subject, I just want to spend just a couple of minutes, guys, highlighting that threat. And also details that I came across coming out of Germany, referencing the recent Russian responses to those NATO missiles going into sort of Russian territory last month. Russia responded, which is kind of it was being labelled as a warning shot. That's what I said. It's a kind of warning shot. Russia launched some ballistic ICBM or IRBM missiles, or whatever you want to call them, into Ukraine. However, these missiles, albeit hypersonic, actually had no payload in terms of any kind of explosive and or sort of nuclear material in any of its warheads, thankfully. But Russia simply wanted to just show that they could, I suppose, and they can launch hypersonic missiles if in fact they've ever pushed it far enough into a corner. But guys, from the very beginning of this war, Russia have been using such missiles anyway. They were using hypersonics in 2023 to take out critical infrastructure in Ukraine. So this is not new. In fact, the only thing that would be new in this war now is the use of a nuclear weapon, whether that be a tactical nuke or something else. And let's not forget also that there have been reports detailing various chemical weapons. This is different. This is not nuclear, it's chemical. Various chemical weapons have already been used on the battlefield in Ukraine by both the Russians and the Ukrainians. So the only thing that's missing now is the nuclear radiation. None of us want that, but it's like I say, that's the only thing that's missing from this war. One thing to understand here, when talking about hypersonic missiles being fired into Ukraine, information pulled from that German state threat document where data on it covers data on interception rates of hypersonic missiles, and that they say that it's scarce, as in it's hard. There's not much information out there. But the Ukraine claims a 25% interception rate for Russian hypersonic Kinzhal and Zyra missiles. But Ukraine sources also indicate such interceptions require salvo firing of all 32 launchers in the US style Patriot battery. So salvo is you have to just fire a shitload of missiles up into the air targeted at this hypersonic. And they do this just to take out or try and take out one or a single hypersonic. By comparison, Germany, the Patriot batteries have 16 launchers, and I think they have something like 32 launchers in total. Um, to be honest though, guys, we've all been familiar with this assumption on hyper and supersonic missile defenses. However, this next piece of information is the most worrying. The Kiel report from Germany, which is Kiel. So if any of you want to go and Google it, have a look. This report writes, it's a German report. It writes, let me just read it out. Beyond the war in Ukraine, the diversification of the Russian hypersonic arsenal is a significant problem for Europe. It is certain that replenishing and expanding this strategic asset will be a priority for the Kremlin. A sufficiently large stockpile distributed across aircraft, surface warships, submarines, and ground launchers opens a possibility of a decapitation strike that causes major damage to the other side's military capabilities and infrastructure in the opening phase of a conflict. Given the military asymmetry between NATO and Russia, a devastating first strike has long been part of Russia's toolkit. Stockpiling hypersonic missiles would unlock the potential for a conventional rather than nuclear first strike, as there is no near-term defensive solution. This, ladies and gents, is a game changer, actually, when you think about this. The use of a ballistic missile with no nuclear warheads to take out strategic NATO targets, and Putin has already simulated this on the public domain by those warning shots fired in Ukraine on the 21st of November. But, and this is a big but, some might be sat there thinking, well, this is good news, no nuclear war, but war remaining in a conventional arena. However, NATO also have this capability. And with that, I've just outlined in terms of NATO's lack of limited resources with defense systems for hypersonics. The same will apply to Russia also. I'm betting that Russia too are lacking defense platforms to stop NATO hypersonics from hitting targets here in Russia. But personally, we know very little about the true and legitimate capabilities of secretive top tier weapon and sort of defense systems. That's it. I can say that there are hypersonic threat defense systems in play. There has to be, but knowing their true capabilities is going to be difficult information to obtain or for anyone to obtain. For as long as there's been supersonic and hypersonic projectiles being designed, tested, and used, you've had MODs and militaries. They've been designing systems to combat this threat. It's a no-brainer. So, don't be fully sucked into this "we have no chance against hypersonics" narrative, guys. When reading this information, I've mixed feelings actually when I say this information, the information out of that German report. Because for the last sort of 2 or 3 years, should we say now, during the Ukraine war, we've been sold that narrative online by nuclear war. Through the continuous threats being made by Russia. So if hypersonics can be used without the involvement of nuclear, then that quite frankly is better than the use of nuclear material, shall we say. This also seems more feasible, likely, and we now know it's possible, as Russia have just demonstrated it. This form of attack is a game changer, and to be honest, for the better. However, guys, I'm not for this war. I'm not for any war, as a matter of fact, but war has been written through history for thousands of years, and that's not likely to change anytime soon. So I just wanted to sort of get this piece of info out, just out there, because as this game of military chess sort of unfolds in Europe, the opening moves are finished, in my view. And we're now moving into the middle game, I'd say. I mentioned it before, but we're going to start seeing a new level of weapons being used, I believe. Of course, the trenches on the front lines will continue. The CQBs in the urbanized areas will continue, and all the other conventional sort of aspects of the war on the battlefield will continue. But I think this next phase, that being the middle game, is where NATO come into the theatre. NATO strategic sites will be targets for those non-nuclear ballistic missiles. We're going to see the ramping up of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. And there is a recent talk about 100,000 NATO troops soon to be on the ground in Ukraine. It's only a matter of time. They're being trained up first. This is it, I think, ladies and gents. We had a short lull in activity online. This is during the 24 hours sort of running up to the US election, and for around about 10 days after that. Now, everything is kind of livened up again. There are new pieces of information being sort of broadcasted. The same threats are still there, but we could be looking at additional threats. That being, the use of a dirty bomb, for example. There's plenty of talk about drones in various places at the moment, everywhere. But not everywhere. But yeah, well, okay, let's say that again. Okay, that it's on mainstream for certain areas, but this is happening in a lot more places that you're not reading about, shall we say? Everyone's got a theory, and it is a new technology first, I suppose, properly introduced in the Ukraine war. Drones are a lifeline for the Ukrainians at the moment, and with that, other countries are taking up this new sort of technology, this drone technology, and they're further advancing in that sort of technology. Um, we're living in testing times, and again, ladies and gents, if you're still walking through life thinking everything's okay, then fine. There's nothing else I can say to change that. I'm not here actually to change your mind. What those people need is actually for something to be detonated somewhere. That I don't mean that. But there are things being detonated all over the place. But what I mean is a bit of a wake up call, I think. Um, because it's really just for people to acknowledge that there are things happening outside of the towns that they live in, that could impact them and their families. It's as simple as that. And if you're living in the UK, or living anywhere near any of those 40 possible targets that I pointed out in the previous video titled Threats to the UK, then be prepared for a possible strike in the form of, well, what we've just been talking about actually on any of those sites near you. So that could be a non-nuclear ballistic missile strike on a nuclear facility. Will also change the dynamics. What I mean by this is just because, there's talk about non-nuclear ballistic hypersonic assets being used, doesn't mean that that's the way it's going to stay. You could find in this world, well, not, let me rephrase that. You could find, if this world war erupts, that the end game, after the middle game spoke about at the beginning of this video, could see the use of nuclear weapons. But ladies and gents, this is all speculation and/or only my opinion, because what do I know? So moving on, we're coming to a close anyway. Thankfully for for some of you. As we come to that close, we cannot forget about the cyber threats from Russia and how our critical infrastructure is a primary target. If any of you have no idea what that means, let me just give you a quick example. So the banking system going down after being hacked. So that's going to be no access to financial assets, money, and spending online. Cash will be king during those times. The water utility provider in your area being hacked. Be ready for all of those panic buyers clearing the shelves in the supermarkets, because you're likely to be one of them. If the electrical grid and utility providers are hacked, then that for many is more catastrophic than the loss of water. No internet and surfing those social media platforms versus a glass of water. You know what I mean. As we finish, I have to emphasize this also. Government and military spokespeople were talking at the NATO Cyber Convention last month, and it's not just last month, but they talk at these events like throughout the whole of the year, more so last year than any other year, obviously because of what's happening around the world. And they're saying that Russia has widened its cyber targets, hitting a number of European countries, and the UK have already been hit, and they acknowledge that Russia have already targeted UK media companies, telecoms, and more importantly, there are UK power infrastructure companies. They're being hit at the moment, or the utility providers. And before I go, let me put this scenario to you. If your electricity in your home sort of cut off now, and was the case for, let's say, all of the properties, businesses, and systems countrywide, the whole of the UK, how long would you last before the world's, around you start turning upside down? Putin has specifically said publicly last month that he will be targeting British critical infrastructure, such as our electricity grid. So all I'm trying to say, guys, the threats are there. It's actually happening. They're trying to do it. It could be just a matter of time. But just keep it in mind, and more importantly, just try and prepare for such event. I'm not talking about the loss of luxuries such as the internet, TVs, and mobile phones. We're talking about fridges and freezers, heating, boiling systems, and hot water, electric cookers, microwaves, and other means of cooking. You have 24 hours max, and then all your food in your fridge freezers is done. Every fucker will be panicking, depending on how mainstream broadcasted, that sort of news. And with that, the supermarket shelves will be emptied within 24 hours also. And we haven't got started on the banking system, PDQ machines in shops, online shopping, and fuck me, the list goes on. And I'm going to be super generous here. And let's just say, for instance, that electricity is off just for 3 days. How many of you even have candles in your home? There's a lot of people, unless you've got a couple of candles there as kind of, like ornament accessories on your mantelpiece, I'm not on about that, you know. Anyway, you can see where we could end up going with all this. We're not going down that rabbit hole either. As I finish, though, the answer to the question with an explanation. So that was a question right at the very beginning. So Wales to London is approximately, so the question was, how long would it take for a particular missile to leave a submarine 50 miles in the Atlantic, off the coast of Wales, to hit a target in central London? So Wales to London is approximately 215 miles. There are Russian submarines within close proximity of the UK and other European coastlines all the time. The RSM 256 Balava is one of Russia's fastest ballistic missiles. It has a cruise speed of Mach 24. So in layman terms, that is 28,600 kilometers per hour. Let me just repeat that for you. 26,600 kilometers per hour. So that is 17,771 miles per hour. But to put some kind of cherry on the top of the Russian cake, this missile is one of Russia's fastest ballistic missiles and is a submarine launched ballistic missile. So let me just repeat that. A ballistic missile that can travel 17,771 miles per hour can be launched from a submarine that could be sat, 20 or 50 miles off the coast of the UK. If one of those missiles was launched from, let's say, a Russian submarine off the coast of Wales, my question was, do you know how long it would take to hit London? That missile will be traveling at 296 miles per minute. So that missile is hitting the center of London in approximately 45 seconds. So a submarine 50 miles off the coast of Wales can fire a Balava 256, and within 46 seconds is hitting the center of London. That's why I emphasize this, guys. The threat of those submarines is on a completely different level, and because they are situated and swimming around so close to our coastlines, it is the biggest threat that we've got, closely followed by cyber attacks. I do not think for 1 minute, though, guys, that you're going to be seeing missiles traversing across the skies of Russia and Europe before hitting the UK target. And to add, to that devastation, these missiles that we're talking about are carried by the Russian Bora class subs, of which they have 8 in service. And on top of that, each of those submarines carries 12 to 16 RSM-56 beloved ballistic missiles. The only plus side to this news for us really is that the warheads on those missiles would be between 100 to 150 kiloton. Unless you understand kilotons and stuff like that, you're probably not going to understand what that means. But if you haven't watched my previous video whereby we do talk about what different types of missiles or what they are, launch facilities, warheads, yields, and so on, a 100 to 150 kiloton warhead would sit in the category of a tactical nuke. So these missiles are specifically designed to kind of take out counter-force targets or military targets, and could be used also on counter-value targets such as computer data centers or refineries and shipping ports and docks. So not missiles of mass destruction as per se. And I know there will be people out there saying, well, we're all fucked then. But that comment couldn't be any further from the truth. Of course, those people living in any kind of impact area are done. But then, if a missile with a normal explosive warhead hits that target, people will die. As harsh as that may sound, we now haven't got time to just sit around or walking around on eggshells trying to not hurt people's feelings and pretending that nothing's happening and listening to people yap on about how others out there are simply scaremongering and all the rest of it. You've got to be some kind of idiot really to not sit there and at the very least acknowledge that the world is on the brink of all-out war. Don't be complacent, guys. Just because none of this is happening outside your homes yet. And if you want to hold on to any idea that Trump is going to come in or come along and change everything, then that's great. Amongst such testing times, one has to have some kind of hope, I suppose. If Trump is your hope, that's great. If normality bias is your medicine, then that's good for you. If, throwing your head into the sand and hoping it's all simply going to blow away, then good luck with that shit too. For the sake of being just a little bit knowledgeable, aware, and prepared, you could make your whole lives and also the lives of your family or anyone you're responsible for a whole lot better. So just knowledgeable, just be knowledgeable, because much of what you hear out there, certainly online, isn't as bad as it's being portrayed to be. Being aware. Now that just goes without saying, guys. When you cross the road, you're looking both ways so you don't get whacked by a vehicle. And being prepared for an unfortunate situation, whatever that might be, is simple, common sense, guys. Right, I'm finishing off. So unfortunately, there are so many people still out there today, guys, still thinking that everything's okay, and they're just getting on with their shit. Listen, guys, the Christmas period, whilst it obscured one's judgment and deflected one's thought process, has finished. And I'm not, suggesting for 1 minute that life should stop for everyone, that you should just, drop everything that you're doing and hunker down and just wait for the bombs to drop. I've covered in previous sort of videos, and of course, this all depends on where in the world you live. But let's just say, for example, the UK, because that's where I am. You don't need to be seeing bombs dropping in your back gardens, guys, for there to be an impact for you. Although the threat from Russia or a Russian attack for many seems unlikely here in the UK, you're mistaken. Just think about those submarines. That was me really kind of just putting it into context, shall we say. Listen, ladies and gents, um, all of this is unfolding and happening around us. Um, they're, you know, they're not just normal signs, but they're obvious signs hitting, some people square in the face. The whole of Europe are now talking about nuclear attacks. Governments are handing out, war preparation booklets and more talk from various countries on how many bunkers do they need to sort of utilize in those countries if needed. Europe is on a war footing. World War III could have very well already started, and in my view, that's my view. Okay, guys, don't just take that with a pinch of salt. I believe it's already started. I think this, World War III started back in February of 2022, and I'm not just talking about Ukraine. It's a world. This is a world conflict. There's 3 or 4 other regions that are preparing. We don't hear as much about it, because we talk about what's happening closer to home. Anyway, I should have warned you, actually, guys, that I should have warned you at the beginning of the video that I do sometimes have a tendency to go off track. But these points are important, really, to fully understand the threats to you and your family and your country also. Being, you know, just being prepared, and, just keep your ear to the ground, really. Right, that's it from me. I'll just finish off by saying, if you're looking for any New Year's resolutions that you haven't started yet, just get yourselves military fit and infantry aware. Keep an ear to the ground, stay aware, and just prepare, guys. And I'll be back, I'll be back soon.